when we talk about how we do this ethically, we tap into research from social psychology. There's decades of research, in fact, 9 decades now, where people have spent their days and weeks and careers studying human behavior, constructing experiments, and they can come back and tell us with certainty that there are more effective ways to interact with people to get to that yes. People often equate it with manipulation, and they couldn't be more different. Manipulation is all one-sided. It's about me caring what I get. If you get something good, hey, that's okay. But I only care about the fact that I'm going to win. Ethical persuaders are always looking to create mutually beneficial outcomes.
Welcome to the Full Funnel Freedom Podcast. If you are listening to this, you are likely leading a team responsible for generating revenue. Purpose of Full Funnel Freedom is to support people like yourself and keep your funnels consistently, reliably full. Welcome to the Full Funnel Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Hamish. Tonight, I am delighted to have Brian Ahearn as my guest. Brian is the Chief Influence Officer at Influence People, LLC, and is a faculty member at the Cialdini Institute. He's an international speaker, trainer, and author of multiple books on influence. Brian is one of only a dozen people in the world who holds the coveted Cialdini Method Certified Trainer designation. Brian, welcome to Full Funnel Freedom.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, as am I. I loved our first visit that set up this podcast, and I'm really excited to have you share your ideas and insights with the sales leaders who are listening around the world. So, Brian, giving the audience the 30,000-foot view, who you are, where you are today, tell us the story of Brian. Where did you start? How did you get to where you are? And then we'll carry on the conversation from there.
All right. I live in Columbus, Ohio. Kind of grew up here. Took a job in insurance, knew nothing about it coming out of college, but I was dating a girl, had been for a long time. She was here in Columbus. So I thought, I need to go to the interview, liked everything that I heard, took the job. And then the very first day of work, I met my wife coming up on my 36th anniversary. So the girl was out, the wife was in. But I learned that insurance was actually a really noble career because at the end of the day, we do 2 things. We help people. Something bad happens, we help them get back on their feet. And we also help the economy. I mean, nobody's going to loan you a bunch of money to buy a house, start a business, whatever, if you can't guarantee repayment. So the industry really helps to grow the economy. And so as I dove into this, I came across the work of Dr. Robert Cialdini when I was involved with sales training, working with field salespeople. And I was just so enamored by what he was talking about, the psychology of persuasion, or sometimes known as the science of influence, that I dove deep into that and started using it in every facet of what I was doing. I was so enamored with it that I knew it's what I would do with the rest of my career. And so 5 years ago, I made the decision to leave the insurance company and pursue my company, Influence People, on a full-time basis. My target market remains insurance because I understand it so well. I have lots of clients outside the industry, but typically they find me because of the connection to Robert Cialdini. So I love what I do because at the end of the day, I think that 2 things happen when you understand how to ethically persuade people. You will enjoy more professional success, and I think you will have a lot more personal happiness when people more willingly say yes to you.
Amen. I love that. And I love the story. By the way, congratulations on the 36 years. That's really incredible. So ethical persuasion, love this framing of it. So when we look at that from a perspective of a sales leader, what does ethical persuasion actually mean in the real world?
Well, persuasion is not just about changing how people think and feel. It's ultimately about changing their behavior. It may start with changing how they're thinking or feeling about something, but ultimately, especially as a salesperson, you don't want them to say, hey, that's a great proposal. You want them to sign the contract and ultimately start doing business with you. We want to change that behavior, convert them from a prospect into a client. So when we talk about how we do this ethically, we tap into research from social psychology. There's decades of research, in fact, 9 decades now, where people have spent their days and weeks and careers studying human behavior, constructing experiments, and they can come back and tell us with certainty that there are more effective ways to interact with people to get to that yes. People often equate it with manipulation, and they couldn't be more different. Manipulation is all one-sided. It's about me caring what I get. If you get something good, hey, that's okay. But I only care about the fact that I'm going to win.
Mhm.
Ethical persuaders are always looking to create mutually beneficial outcomes. So I'm not going to try to close a deal when I can clearly see that it's not in your best interest. We're going to look for a way to make this such a situation that when you walk away, you feel good about the transaction. I feel good about that transaction. It's very likely that we'll want to continue doing business, that they'll want to help each other. So that's at a very high level. That's what we're looking for in ethical influence.
I love that idea. And so then if I'm a sales leader and I'm trying to ethically influence or ethically persuade one of my sellers who's maybe not, they're hunting too small, right? They're comfortable hunting rabbits. They'll get the occasional small deer, but anything large deer or even bears or elephants is completely beyond them, no matter how many times I've offered carrots and sticks and all those other things which are not ethical. How as a sales leader can I use this idea of ethical persuasion or ethical influence to support my seller in raising their game?
Well, Tom Hopkins, and you may be, and your listeners may be familiar with Tom Hopkins. I think he put it best when he said, when you say it, they doubt it. But when they say it, they believe it. And so as a sales leader, as somebody who's going to be coaching people to try to help them improve, you may know or think that you have a good idea of what they need to do, but you're just putting it on the table as your idea. If you're skilled at asking the right questions and getting them to start coming up with some ideas, they will own those much more than if you tell them what to do. And so a big component of what we talk about is called commitment and consistency. It's about me asking the right questions and getting you to say yes to those questions because you are more likely then to follow through. There's just this internal part of us that first and foremost, we feel better about ourselves when we live up to our word, but we also know we look better to the people that we've committed to. So that would be one piece of advice I would give sales leaders is learn how to ask the right questions to get those people to surface the answers. They will run with them much harder and longer than if you tell them where they need to run.
Love that. Yeah, you and I are completely aligned on that. So, and then that ties into the commitment. Now, the consistency standpoint of this, because we're all wired for trust, right? And from what I've learned is when we are consistent, we have higher trust. We let people know that they can rely on us. So when we're looking from a sales leadership perspective, how can we leverage that idea of consistency to raise the trust that our team members have in us, and by extension, their prospects?
Well, you bring up a good nuance of influence. So when we talk about using the principle of consistency, it's about how can I tap into what you've said, what you've done, what you believe, what you value, all of those things. If I can structure what I'm proposing, or I can ask the right questions, that makes you more consistent. As a sales leader, when I am consistent, I gain trust. When I follow through, if I say I'm going to email you tomorrow and I do it, I have gained trust with you. And anytime I do those things, so one of the things that I do quite often, if somebody says, "Hey, would you email me information, by the 15th?" Once I get that information, I'm going to send it over and say, "Hamish, as promised." And then that little phrase, "as promised," highlights the fact that I did what I said. Otherwise, people, it could go under the radar and they may not notice. So there's these little things that we can do that will highlight that and start to gain us more and more trust.
That is incredibly important. Sales leaders highlight that, timestamp it, mark it down, that as promised, right? That Brian just shared with you. That is a subtle way of increasing your trust and also your influence with your sellers, because it's telling them that you're being consistent. Free offer for listeners of the Full Funnel Freedom podcast. Go to www.fullfunnelfreedom.com/scale to get your white paper, 8 fundamentals of building a scalable sales model. If you're listening to Full Funnel Freedom, you are wanting your funnel to be consistently, reliably full and sustainably scalable. So go get your white paper, 8 fundamentals of building a scalable sales model at www.fullfunnelfreedom.com/scale. Now, back to the show. Brian, what are some of those other ways that as sales leaders, because we can demonstrate to our team members how to increase their influence with their buyers, because adults learn by imitation and repetition. So as the leader, we demonstrate what we want our sellers to do in the field.
I think the biggest thing to demonstrate first and foremost is what we call the principle of liking. We all know that people will buy from those they know, like, and trust. Now, they may not buy from you just because they like you, but it's almost assured they'll never buy from you if they don't. If they've got any kinds of options, and there are very few companies that have cornered the market on something that clients can't get in some way, shape, or form somewhere else. So I think it's critical that we tap into this principle of liking. But Hamish, it's not about me getting you to like me. It's about me coming to really know and like you. And so I'm investing myself in getting to know you. I'm asking questions and doing everything I can to find out what we have in common, because I know that we will like each other more if we have things that are in common. I will look for the things I can genuinely compliment about you, because that is causing me to think more highly of you. I will look for ways that we can work together cooperatively and have success, because I also know that when we do that and I see you working hard, again, I think more highly of you. This is why it's key, because you also can tell, does that guy Brian really like me? You're going to be noticing the look in the eye, the tone of voice, the body language, all of these subtle cues. And because I am doing what I can to come to know and like you, that's what starts changing everything, because you will be far more open to whatever I ask if you believe I have your best interests at heart. And I would want a sales team that I'm leading to take that same mentality toward all of their prospective clients and their current clients. Get those people to realize you really do like and care for them, and everything else gets easier after that.
Love that. Now, what that really sounds like is we're tying in the principle of reciprocity, because instead of you trying to get me to like you, you're trying to like me more, which then by reciprocity would cause me to like you more. Am I on the right path with that?
Yeah, we always talk about whatever you want from people, be the first to give it. If you want trust, if you want relationship, if you want hard work, long hours, whatever it is, you need to be the person who demonstrates that. And people naturally respond to the principle of reciprocity. When someone does something, gives something, whatever that may be, people tend to respond in kind. So you are tapping into that principle. But then the other thing that starts happening is, because I have come to know and like you, other things that I do that I'm giving, you genuinely receive those, not as, hey, this guy Brian's just doing this to get me to do something. It's like, Brian has come to know me and I can tell he likes me, and this is probably, in my best interest, or this really will be helpful for me. So you receive my giving differently. It's no longer a give to get, which some people think of as reciprocity. It's giving because I genuinely want to help the people that I know, like, and trust. And I also then realize it's going to make it so much easier for you to reciprocate. And we've created what I like to call a virtuous cycle.
Say more about the virtuous cycle. What is it, and how does that eventually benefit us long term as opposed to just transactionally?
Okay, well, let's talk about what happens so often in interpersonal relationships. It could be married, it could be dating, or any number of other relationships. Somebody says or does something that's hurtful. And so what's the other person do? They say or do something that's hurtful. And you start to get this downward spiral. I'm saying that we can reverse that by doing things genuinely to benefit the other person out of a desire to help them because we've come to know and like them. And so I've seen this in my personal relationship with my wife, where I do something and she really appreciates it. And so what does she do? She does something kind for me. And because I see that she's reciprocating and how that works, it just opens my heart up to do more. And so we end up going the opposite way that most couples go. That's why I call it a virtuous cycle.
Beautiful. I love that. And that certainly applies with our sellers talking to their buyers. And it certainly applies with us talking to our sellers. So the other thing I'm thinking about, because this all sounds awesome, Brian, and clearly it's been demonstrated by Dr. Cialdini, and there's plenty of books on this topic. And also there's at least one listener out there who's doing the yeah, but, right? We all have one, right? In all of our workshops, you've run into them. And so when we're talking about all this, there's going to be one person who puts their hand up and goes, yeah, I can see what you're doing. I'm not going to fall for it. when we're working with our sellers, when we're working with our team members, and we have someone who's got that mindset of, you're trying to manipulate me, which you brought up earlier, how do we help them understand that we're not trying to manipulate them? We're genuinely interested in their own success, and we need them to help us as much as we're trying to help them.
Well, I think when people are very resistant to that, that's more on them than it is on somebody like me who's trying to ethically come to know and like the people, to be able to stimulate more production, which ultimately helps them as well.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of like the person who says, I don't need a pat on the back to know I'm doing a good job. You know who says that? People who never get a pat on the back. It is a self-defense mechanism, and they are like a thirsty person in the desert. And when you give them a glass of water, all of a sudden it can begin to change everything.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that the very first time it's going to change everything. And could I share a quick story? And
please.
So in my insurance career, when I was in the sales department, I was doing sales training with the field people and insurance agents. The head of the claims operation really liked the influence. He knew that settling claims is also a persuasive conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So he invited me to start working with the claims team. Well, the very first meeting I go to, we're sitting at this long table, and right across from me is the claims trainer. Mm. And he's sitting there with his arms folded, leaning forward, and his look is, what are you doing here? This is my territory. I mean, it just felt like he was doing this. Mm-hmm. Well, several weeks later, I told the head of claims, I said, I'm done with all my spring training. If you need me, just let me know. I'm thinking he's going to invite me to a lot of meetings in the home office. Instead, he says, hey, will you visit all of the claims offices? And it's got to be with this guy. This guy is going to, because he's the claims trainer. So I'm thinking, great, I got to spend 6 of the next 8 weeks on the road with somebody who clearly doesn't like me and kind of sees me as a threat. So our first travel, we go to Minneapolis, and we're in the airport in Minneapolis, go to Starbucks. I ask for my drink, and I said, can I have one of those green sticks to put in my drink? Lady gives it to me. He goes up, he orders, and he says, can I have one of those green sticks? And I kid you not, she goes, I'm sorry, I just gave the last one to him, pointing to me. So I turned to him and I said, Brandon, here, you can have my stick. And he's like, no, it's yours. And I'm going, come on, you can have the stick. I said, I drink my coffee pretty quick. I don't need it. He wouldn't take it.
Okay.
Next week, we're traveling. I always get to the airport early. So I'm sitting and relaxing, and I see him coming down the terminal. I said, hey, Brandon, I got something for you. And he goes, oh, what? And I pull out of my briefcase a green stick. And I said, in case you're traveling and you ever need one. And he laughed, and it broke the ice, and everything started to change. We started to find out we had a lot in common. We started enjoying the travels. And by the end of the time, and we probably went to 15 or so claims offices. He had to sit through the same presentation no less than 24 times. When we finished the training, I got him a card that had the Wizard of Oz on it, and I knew it would mean something because I had talked about the Wizard of Oz in the training. I gave him a $25 Starbucks card, and I put a green stick in it. And I did this because he booked all the flights, he booked all the car rentals, he drove. I just showed up and did my thing.
Cool.
Sometime later, I went down to his office, and the card was on the wall with the stick.
Wow.
And being an experienced salesperson, and I think people listening would know, individuals don't put things on the wall of their office unless it means something. And I saw that it meant something to him. And he had kind of a off-putting personality a little bit, like I said before. But when the walls came down, I found out he was an awesome guy. And even though he left the company a long time ago, and now it's been 5 years for me, we still have a close friendship. At least every other month we're having coffee. He is doing what he can to get me into where he used to work and where he's currently working. He's one of my biggest advocates. So I had to put into practice what I preach. And I love that story because beyond enjoying the travels, I made a friend for life.
What an incredible story. Thank you very much for sharing that with me and with our audience of sales leaders around the world. And a couple of things that I picked up out of that is, number one, you said it is, it's more about them, right? Like if let's just say that I'm your sales leader and I go knock on your office and I go, hey, Brian, and you go, what? Well, that's not about me. I just happen to be the first person that you talk to when after the other thing happened, right? So staying present, not taking that personally. But then the other side of it is don't give up. Like, I think it was the third time you offered him a green stick before he finally begrudgingly accepted it. And that kind of started opening the door. So sales leaders, it's not going to work the first time. We're still working with human beings. They have their own hopes and fears and dreams and worldviews. So take Brian's story and keep going with it, even though it feels like you're never going to get there. Is that accurate interpretation?
It is, because if it's who you really are, then you won't abandon it because somebody didn't respond the way that you wanted. I can think of somebody else, and it wasn't really sales related, who early on, she told me after the fact, she goes, yeah, when we were having lunch and you were telling me this, I just thought you were full of BS. And later on, we became wonderful friends, and I had an opportunity to really have an impact on her life. So if I had just abandoned that because, oh, well, this person's not responding, then I would have been inauthentic, and they would have seen it, and that, these relationships never would have happened.
Totally. And that's where, I would imagine you've had this experience where people are looking for the move, right? Tell me the move, tell me the line, tell me the thing to say. And that's inauthentic, because if all I'm looking for is a move, well, that's like, take this pill and lose 20 pounds. Oh, I guess they actually have that now. That just came out. That's a separate thing called Ozempic. But that's the idea that I love you're bringing up, is authenticity, right? Talking ethical and authentic. So as leaders, we're imparting this in our team, right? We're sharing it with them. They're buying into it. How do we coach someone who might be using it as a move, as opposed to genuine ethical influence, where they genuinely want to support their buyers and help them solve their problems?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to some of the things talked about earlier. If I'm asking the right questions and getting them to see the value in relationships, and talking about the relationships that they have that are very genuine, the clients, and why are they that way, and how did they get that way? And wouldn't it be nice if you had that with more of your clients? Wouldn't it be nice if you could potentially have it with all of those clients? And so we need you to be that person, that genuine, authentic person to those other clients too, so that it's not just transactional. Because again, I think people can sniff that out. And once they do, then what you're offering is only a means to your own end, not necessarily to their end. And that's going to kill it. That's going to open them up to talking to somebody else. And if that person is more authentic, they're probably going to win the business.
Absolutely. Because going back to what you said earlier, we want to work with people who we know, like, and trust. And if there's that measure of a crack of inauthenticity, then they're going to start to listen to those people who call up and go, hey, how about you come over here, instead of working with those guys. Brian,
can I share another quick story? Please. Where this one wasn't with a difficult relationship. This was with a client, and they were a great client. And so I stayed in touch. And then after a while, my contact said, with the looks like a looming recession and things, I really don't think there's going to be any opportunity for you. And I said, you know what? That's okay. I said, I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I want to make sure that we stay in touch. If business comes out of it, awesome. And if it doesn't, that's okay. And so I stayed in touch with this individual for years. And in one of my authentic communications, I let him know that our daughter had gotten married, and shared some photos and things, and just talked about what an incredible day it was. He came back and said, that is so amazing. He said, I just got engaged. We're getting married in Germany next year. We would be honored if you would come. Wow. My wife and I are like, yeah, that's all we needed, was a great reason to go over. So we went to the wedding, and he treated us fabulously. And the relationship has just it's just really taken off from that point. If I had just looked at it as a transaction and thought, well, I'm not going to waste any time calling or emailing or doing anything, I would have lost out on what is becoming a wonderful friend.
What an incredible story. And it also, again, illustrates we are still selling to humans. We're still got humans on our teams. And when we have that was a vulnerable thing you did, Brian, right? Like, you didn't have to, like you said. And you shared a little bit about yourself. You were vulnerable, which created that reciprocity and that willingness to engage. What an incredible story. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
So, Brian, I love influence. I love Dr. Cialdini's work. I've got several of his books on my bookshelf behind me, and I'm looking at adding some of yours to my bookshelf as well. So, as we are wrapping up, I've got a few questions for you before we finish today. First question is, if you could go back and coach younger Brian, you can go back as far as you like, and you go, hey, younger Brian, in the future, you are going to be one of the only Cialdini certified master trainers in the world. You have this great business. You have this great relationship with your wife. You're also going to show up with a bunch of scar tissue and bumps and bruises. What are you going to coach younger Brian to say or do differently to arrive at the same place, but with fewer bumps and bruises and less scar tissue?
I had a friend who passed away recently. I just found out yesterday, and I knew that she was sick. And we worked together at the insurance company, and she really was a model for me in networking and interpersonal relationships. I was the kind of guy, when we would have these big events and insurance agents would come in, I was thinking like, oh, they're not going to want to talk to me. They want to talk to the VP of sales, the head of whatever. And not thinking that, you know what, they're strangers and they don't know anybody. And they're probably happy that anybody comes up and talks to them and makes them feel welcome. And she really worked with me to help me feel more comfortable with that. I wish I would have learned that earlier. And I wish that I also would have expanded my network beyond the walls of the company much sooner. Because when I left, I had lots of LinkedIn contacts, but huge number of them were from the company that I worked with. And I wish I would have done a better job. So I would have been a lot more outgoing with all the agents that were representing us. If I met company people from other companies, I would have worked out a lot harder, because I see now just how important it is to have that vast network. And even if they're loose connections, a lot of those loose connections will end up being very valuable.
What a great bit, what good a bit of advice, is something that I'm coaching my eldest daughter, who's 11 and a half, on. How do you build out your network, right? Start doing it now, and it's going to support you over time. And my condolences on the passing of your friend.
Thank you.
So you've got a lot of books. We're going to put the links in the show notes. I am curious, what are some other things that you have read, watched, listened to, whether recently or in the past, that you would encourage the sales leaders listening to check out to further their own personal and professional development?
Well, one thing I'll share, I like reading books on faith. Every morning, that's something I start with. An author that has really stuck with me for a long time, over many years. I've reread his books multiple times. His name, Dallas Willard. So that's, for me, is a really important. I try not to just wake up and dive into my day. I spend time taking a walk and thinking and praying. And so I would encourage anybody, whatever your faith is, don't just dive into that day. Take time to really reflect on bigger issues of life. When it comes to what they should read, I will say the first and foremost book would be Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. When they spoke with a number of business leaders, Mark Cuban's, Jeff Bezos, the late Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, and they compiled the best books of all time, the number one business book was Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, Science, and Practice. Because it will not give you the strategies that you may need in certain things, but it will give you the foundation to understand which strategies are going to work and which ones aren't, or to take some and tweak them based on the understanding of how humans think and behave. So for me, it is like the foundation of the house. Everything else is going to be built on top of that. So that would be my number one resource.
Very cool. And we'll put a link to that. And most of our listeners has probably at least heard of that book, if not read it once or twice. And so listeners, highly agree with Brian. Check that book out again and again. Add it to your digital bookshelf or your physical bookshelf, wherever you get your books, and go back to that book over and over, because it is massively, massively influential, pun intended. Brian, you've given us some incredible ideas and insights today around ethical influence and ethical persuasion, and how we can leverage this with our sellers so that they can then leverage it with their buyers. What is a closing thought you have, a final bit of wisdom, or something to plug? The floor is yours.
One piece of wisdom I would give people, my old high school football coach used to tell us this all the time, so I thought he made it up. I learned later it was the Roman philosopher Seneca who said it first. But luck is where preparation meets opportunity, that you have to be prepared when those opportunities come up. And I will give you an example that I will have all kinds of conversations about what I do. And I was at a cigar shop one day, and my wife was with me, and had this great conversation with this young guy who was pretty new to sales. And as we left, my wife said, "I'm so frustrated for you, because that conversation isn't going to go anywhere. That guy's not, high enough on the chain," and all this stuff. And I said, "You know what, Jane?" I said, "It doesn't matter. I had a rep there. I got a chance to practice. And every time I do that, when that opportunity comes, maybe I'm on a plane and I'm sitting next to a decision maker, I will be that much better at communicating who I am and what I do because I've just done it with anybody who is interested and willing to listen. So I don't look at those as wasted opportunities. I look at those as the preparation that is going to be ready or help me when the opportunity comes. And so it won't really be luck. It will have been preparation.
Beautiful way to wrap us up today. Brian, I have really enjoyed our time together today and our visits previous. I really look forward to staying in touch offline. Thank you for being a guest on Full Funnel Freedom.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Sales leaders, I had a great time visiting with Brian. I am a big fan of Dr. Cialdini's work and very grateful that Brian and I got introduced and got to share some of his ideas and insights with you. And for my takeaways, the number one thing is being authentic. And I get that that's a cliche and it gets a bit overused. I like the phrase genuine. I will actually say in my emails, I am genuinely curious, or I'll say when I'm selling, I will say to a potential client, I'm genuinely curious to know what you have to say. I'm not looking for you to answer in a particular direction, which is true. I'm not actually looking for them to answer in a specific way. I'm genuinely curious to hear what they have to say and how they are thinking about things. And that ties into that idea of it might not work the first time. All of this stuff sounds good, right? It all sounds good. Oh, influence and, ethical persuasion and ethical influence sounds great. And it is not a magic bullet or a magic wand or anything that we think is going, when we say it, our team members are going to be like, where have you been all my life? Oh, I completely see the world through a new set of eyes. It's going to take repetition and it's going to have to be authentic to who we are. So if you are someone who's maybe a little bit more reserved, or you are someone who, like Brian said, is the person who's like, I don't need a pat on the back to tell me how good I'm doing. Well, actually, you probably do. And so I would go get that need met and then go seek to give it to your people. All of us need strokes, right? Strokes are units of recognition. They can be touch-based, they can be verbal, they can be written, it can be a gift, it can be time. As a leader, the number one gift we can give to our team members is our time. And so we, however, need to make sure that our sellers are earning our time. Right? Most leaders are spending their time with the bottom, the C level, who are, probably on their way out, and we're just trying to, keep them around for a little while longer. Have your people earn their time and give them those strokes. So if you're the type of person who doesn't feel like they need a lot of strokes, you might not be. However, we're not looking at you, we're looking at our team member. And as Brian said, we want to genuinely like them. And because of reciprocity, they will likely genuinely like us. And then they're much more likely to be able to be influenced by us. And then the last thing to take away is it's never about us. Right. So when we are attempting to have a genuine conversation with a team member, and maybe they're not responding in a way that we believe they would based on how they are responding to our genuinely curious questions, there's something going on with them. Stop whatever line of question you're going down and ask something like, hey, Hamish, it feels like there's something going on that you might not be comfortable sharing with me. Is that accurate? Now, notice I didn't actually say, tell me what's going on. I said, it feels like there's something going on that you might not be comfortable sharing with me. Is that accurate? Because our team member can either say, yes, there is, or no, there's not. If they say, no, there's not, then we can go down the path of, well, I'm kind of curious why you're responding to me in the way that you are. Would you help me understand what's prompting this response from you? If they say yes, then we can say, thank you for sharing that with me. Do you want to stop what we're talking about right now? Do you need some time? Do you need some space? And we can also say, what are you comfortable sharing with me? Because especially if our team member is looking for some, time off or some sort of concession from us, we are probably going to need to get a little bit of information. Now, legally and by HR policies, there's certainly a level that we are allowed to ask for. And then there's beyond that is what our team member is comfortable telling us. So keep that in mind when you're getting that reaction from someone, whether it's professionally or personally, where you're like, this doesn't make sense that they're responding to me in this way. Stop and ask the tough question. It feels like there's something going on that you're not comfortable sharing with me. Is that accurate? And then whether they say no or whether they say yes, you can play out that conversation. I'm curious what your key takeaways were. Let us know in the comments on our social media. And until we connect on the next episode, go create full funnel freedom. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Full Funnel Freedom podcast. You can continue to support us by leaving us a review and a rating, sharing this episode with a couple of sales leaders in your network who you care about. I'd love to connect with you. I'm easy to find, Hamish Knox on LinkedIn. Also, if you'd like a free 15-minute call with me, go to www.hamish.sandler.com/how-to-sandler. Until we connect on the next episode, go create full funnel freedom.